The hot afternoon sun blazed fiercely. Sandra wiped the sweat from her forehead, her school uniform already sticking to her slim frame. She had just finished her final exam, the one she believed could change her future forever, and was on her way home, clutching her battered backpack close to her chest. That's when she saw her. An old woman, bent almost double under the weight of a heavy bundle of firewood, staggered along the narrow road. Her feet were bare, cracked from years of hardship, and her faded wrapper barely clung to her frail body. Each step looked like a battle between her will and her weakness. Without thinking twice, Sandra dropped her backpack and ran across the road. "Grandma, let me help you," she called out, her voice breathless. The old woman looked up, startled, her grey eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, it seemed like she didn't trust the kindness. In this village, people rarely stopped for strangers, unless they had something to gain. Sandra didn't wait for permission. She carefully lifted the massive bundle of firewood off the old woman's head and hoisted it onto her own. It was heavier than anything she had ever carried, and her knees almost buckled under the weight. But she smiled bravely. "I'll carry it for you. Where is your house?" The old woman hesitated, studying Sandra's face like she was searching for something, or recognizing something long forgotten. Finally, she pointed down a winding, lonely path that led deep into the thick bushes. Sandra followed without fear. They walked in silence, broken only by the chirping of birds and the crunch of their feet against the dry earth. Every few steps, Sandra had to shift the firewood bundle to stop it from slipping off her head. Sweat rolled down her temples, soaking her uniform, but she never complained. After what felt like forever, they reached a tiny, broken-down hut made of mud and rusted sheets. It looked abandoned, like something the world had long given up on. The old woman turned to Sandra, her lips trembling. "Thank you, my child. May the heavens reward you." Sandra smiled shyly. "It's okay, Grandma. I'm just glad to help." But just as Sandra turned to leave, she heard a strange, cracking sound behind her, like something snapping, something wrong. She spun around, and what she saw made her heart stop. The old woman was gone. In her place stood a tall, regal-looking woman dressed in a glowing white gown, her hair flowing like silk in the evening breeze. The broken hut behind her now shimmered, turning into a beautiful, golden palace right before Sandra's eyes. Sandra's mouth opened in shock. She stumbled backward, her mind screaming that this couldn't be real. She blinked several times, but the palace remained, shining brighter with each second. And then the woman spoke, her voice soft but powerful. "You have done what many would not. You have passed a test few could ever dream of." Sandra froze. What test?" she stammered. But before the woman could answer, the earth beneath Sandra's feet began to rumble. Trees shook violently. The golden palace started to shift, tilting dangerously. Sandra cried out, reaching for something, anything to hold on to. Then the ground split open under her feet. She screamed and everything went black. Sandra's eyes fluttered open, her heart pounding like a drum. For a moment, she couldn't tell where she was. Everything around her was dark and silent, except for the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. Slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim light. She was no longer on the village road, no longer standing in front of a golden palace. Instead, she was deep underground, lying on a soft bed of moss inside a giant cave. Glowing crystals hung from the walls, casting a soft blue light across the massive chamber. Sandra sat up quickly, her head spinning. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, hugging her knees. That's when she heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps coming from the shadows. Fear gripped her. She scrambled backward, until her back pressed against the cold stone wall. Her breath came in short gasps as she watched a figure emerge from the darkness. It was a man, tall and strong, dressed in shining armor that looked ancient. His face was hidden behind a golden helmet, and he carried a long staff that sparkled like the stars. He stopped a few feet away from her. "You have entered the chamber of trials," he said in a deep, rumbling voice. Sandra swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. I was just helping an old woman. I don't even know how I got here." The man tilted his head slightly, studying her like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You helped without expecting anything in return," he said. "Few humans do that. You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Sandra cried, her voice shaking. The man pointed toward a long, twisting path that led deeper into the cave. "You must complete 3 tasks. Only then will you understand the reward waiting for you." Sandra's head spun. Tasks? Trials? This wasn't what she signed up for. She just wanted to get home, tell her mother she finished her exams, and maybe even enjoy a small celebration. Now she was stuck in some strange, magical place with no idea how to get out. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked quietly. The man's voice turned grave. "Refusing means losing not just your way home, but losing yourself." Sandra's blood ran cold. She realized she had no choice. With shaking legs, she stood up. "What's the first task?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The man stepped aside, revealing a small wooden bridge that crossed a dark, swirling river. "Your first task," he said, "is to cross the river of truth." Sandra frowned. It didn't look too hard. She stepped forward cautiously, placing one foot on the narrow bridge. The wood creaked loudly under her weight. But as she took another step, she heard whispers faint at first, then louder. Voices. From the river. She looked down and gasped. The dark water wasn't water at all. It was alive, filled with shifting faces, people she recognized. Her classmates, neighbors, even teachers, all whispering her deepest fears and doubts. "You're not good enough. You'll never leave this village. Nobody will ever care about you." Sandra's hands trembled. She staggered, nearly falling into the churning river below. The voices grew louder, harsher, meaner. Tears filled her eyes. She gripped the wooden rail tightly, her heart screaming at her to turn back, to run, to hide. But somewhere deep inside her, a tiny voice spoke softer than the cruel ones, but much stronger. "You are stronger than you know, Sandra. You helped someone when you didn't have to. You are kind. You are brave." Sandra took a deep breath, shut her eyes tight, and forced herself to take another step forward. Then another, and another. The voices screamed at her, but she kept going, one trembling step at a time. When she finally reached the other side, she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The river behind her went silent. She had made it. When she looked up, the armored man was standing before her, nodding slowly. "You have passed the first trial," he said. Sandra wiped her eyes and stood, feeling a strange warmth growing in her chest, pride, maybe, or hope. But before she could catch her breath, a massive stone door in the wall ahead rumbled and began to open, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward into total darkness. The man pointed toward it. "Your second trial awaits." Sandra's stomach twisted into a knot. What could be waiting for her down there? She took one last glance at the river, then tightened her fists and walked toward the dark staircase. As she stepped through the doorway, the stone door slammed shut behind her with a deafening boom, sealing her inside. And that's when she heard it. A low, rumbling growl from the bottom of the stairs. Something was waiting for her in the dark. Sandra froze on the top step, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the low growl coming from below. The stairway was narrow, carved into the stone, and the only light came from the faint glow of the crystals far behind her. Down there, in the thick, choking darkness, something alive was waiting. She wanted to run. Every part of her body screamed to turn back, but the stone door had sealed behind her. There was no way but forward. Gripping the cool wall for support, Sandra took a deep breath and began to move, one shaky step at a time. The further she descended, the colder the air became. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and her fingers grew numb as she clung to the rough stone. The growling grew louder with every step, vibrating through the walls and into her bones. Finally, she reached the bottom. Before her stretched a wide cavern, and in the middle of it, chained to the floor by thick, glowing chains, was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It was huge, at least 15 feet tall when it stood upright. Its skin was black and leathery, and 2 enormous horns curled from the sides of its wolf-like head. Red eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed directly on her. Sandra's knees wobbled. How was she supposed to face this? The creature lunged forward with a roar that shook the entire cavern, but the chains snapped it back. It snarled in frustration, clawing at the ground, its sharp teeth flashing like knives. Then, the armored man's voice echoed from somewhere unseen. "Your second trial. Tame the beast without using force." Sandra's mouth dropped open. Tame it? She didn't even know how to tame a goat, let alone a monster. The creature roared again, yanking at its chains until the ground cracked. Sandra's mind raced. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't run. There had to be another way. She took a slow step forward. The monster growled louder, its body coiled like a spring ready to pounce. Sandra stopped, her hands raised. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the cavern. The creature snarled again, but its movements slowed slightly, as if confused. "I don't want to fight," Sandra said softly. "I know what it feels like. To be trapped. To be scared." The monster tilted its head, red eyes narrowing. Sandra's heart pounded against her chest. Was it listening? She took another step closer. "When I saw the old woman struggling, I helped her because no one else would. Maybe no one ever helped you either." The monster's growls softened into deep, rumbling breaths. Sandra dared to move closer still, until she was only a few feet away. She could see now, despite its terrifying appearance, there was sadness in the creature's eyes. Pain. "I'm not your enemy," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid." Slowly, she reached out her hand, trembling. The monster leaned forward, sniffing at her fingers. Its breath was hot and rough against her skin. Sandra stood still, every muscle in her body ready to bolt, but she didn't move. Finally, with a deep, shuddering sigh, the creature lowered its massive head and pressed it gently against her hand. Tears sprang to Sandra's eyes. She had done it. The glowing chains around the beast suddenly snapped and vanished into the air like smoke. The creature gave a low, soft grunt and stepped back, bowing its great head respectfully. At that moment, the cavern walls shimmered just like the old hut had before and turned into towering marble pillars, the floor transforming into polished gold. The armored man appeared again, this time standing beside the beast, smiling behind his golden helmet. "You have passed the second trial," he said, his voice warm. Sandra dropped her hand, barely believing what had just happened. But there was no time to celebrate. With a deafening roar, a crack opened in the ground behind the armored man, revealing a staircase leading even deeper underground. From the pit rose a strange, cold wind that made Sandra shiver to her bones. The man's voice grew serious once more. "Your final trial awaits. But beware, Sandra. The third trial is the hardest of all." Sandra clenched her fists with determination. "I'm ready," she said, even though her knees were shaking. The armored man nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As she approached the gaping hole in the ground, the monster, now calm, let out a low, encouraging growl. Sandra took one final glance back at the beast, then stepped onto the staircase. She descended into the unknown once more. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the third trial wouldn't be about strength. It would be about the one thing she never thought she would have to face. The staircase seemed endless. Sandra's feet moved slowly, step after step, deeper into the cold darkness. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became, like it was trying to crush her spirit. Finally, she reached the bottom. There was no cave, no glowing crystals, no monster this time. Instead, Sandra found herself standing in an open field under a sky so dark and empty it felt like all the stars had been swallowed. Ahead of her stood a tall mirror. It was framed in twisted, black vines, and its glass shimmered with an eerie silver light. The armored man appeared once again, his figure faint like a ghost. "This is the final trial," he said, his voice echoing all around her. "You must face your true self." Sandra frowned. What does that mean? But before she could blink, the mirror began to swirl. Shapes appeared inside, and Sandra gasped. She saw herself, but not how she knew herself. The girl in the mirror looked broken, tired, angry, hopeless. Tears streaked down her face. Her school uniform was torn and dirty. Her eyes, usually full of kindness, were filled with bitterness. "You're a nobody," the reflection whispered. "You'll never be anything more than a poor village girl. Nobody cares about you." Sandra shook her head fiercely. "That's not true." The reflection smirked. "Isn't it? You studied so hard, dreaming of a better life. But deep down, you know you'll never escape. You're trapped, just like your mother, just like everyone else." The words cut deeper than any monster's claws, because secretly, Sandra had thought those things too, in her darkest moments. When she watched her mother struggle to sell groundnuts by the roadside, when she sat under the broken streetlights reading by moonlight because there was no electricity, when teachers praised her, but she knew there was no money for university. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Tears welled up in her eyes. Maybe the mirror wasn't lying. Maybe she was trapped. "Give up," the reflection whispered. "It's easier." Sandra fell to her knees. The darkness around her grew thicker, closing in like cold hands. She pressed her hands against her ears, trying to shut out the voice. "You're not good enough. You'll never matter. You'll never leave." Her breathing became ragged. It would be so easy to just give up, to stop fighting. But then a memory floated into her mind. The old woman, the one she had helped. Sandra remembered the way the woman had looked at her, with hope, with gratitude. Sandra remembered how she had smiled through her exhaustion, carrying the heavy firewood without asking for anything in return. "You are kind. You are brave." The memory of the armored man's words echoed in her heart. Sandra took a shaky breath and stood up. "No," she whispered. The reflection sneered. Sandra stepped forward, trembling but determined. "I am not a nobody," she said louder. "I am not trapped. I have dreams, and I have the strength to chase them. Helping others doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger." The mirror began to crack. "I may not be rich," she shouted, "but I am rich in kindness, rich in hope." The crack spread, splintering across the glass like a spiderweb. "I will not give up." With a final cry, Sandra rushed forward and slammed her fists into the mirror. The glass shattered into a million tiny shards, exploding outward in a burst of dazzling white light. Sandra shielded her eyes, the brightness swallowing everything. When the light faded, she found herself standing alone in a beautiful garden, filled with blooming flowers of every color imaginable. The dark sky was gone, replaced by warm sunshine and a gentle breeze. And, standing in the center of the garden, was the old woman. Except now, she wasn't old or frail. She was young, radiant, her eyes sparkling like stars. She wore a flowing white gown, and a golden crown rested on her head. Sandra stared, speechless. The woman smiled warmly and stepped closer. "You have passed all the trials," she said softly. "You have proven your heart." Sandra opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman reached out and placed a hand gently on Sandra's shoulder. "Because of your kindness, your courage, and your refusal to give up your life will change forever." Sandra's eyes widened. "How?" The woman smiled even wider. But before she could answer, the ground beneath them began to tremble, not with fear this time, but with power. The garden blurred around her, colors swirling together in a whirlpool of light. And just like that, Sandra was lifted off her feet, spinning upward, her body weightless, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and excitement. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew this. Her life would never be the same again. The world spun faster and faster, colors merging into brilliant streams of gold, blue, and silver. Sandra squeezed her eyes shut, her body floating in a rush of warm wind. Then everything stilled. Sandra landed softly on her feet, her shoes touching cool marble. She opened her eyes slowly and gasped. She was standing in a grand palace, bigger and more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined. Tall golden pillars lined the vast hall, glittering under a glass ceiling that showed a clear blue sky. Rivers of crystal water flowed beside marble paths, and flowers bloomed everywhere, filling the air with a sweet, calming scent. At the far end of the hall stood a magnificent throne, and sitting upon it was the woman she had helped, the same woman who had tested her. Only now she shone with a light so bright and powerful that Sandra had to blink. Behind her throne stood many others, kings, queens, and elders, all dressed in brilliant colors, watching Emma with smiles of approval. Sandra's heart raced. What was this place? Why had they brought her here? The woman rose from her throne and descended the marble steps gracefully, her crown catching the light like 1,000 tiny suns. She stopped in front of Sandra, her voice kind but strong. "Sandra," she said, "you have done what many could not." Sandra swallowed hard, not trusting herself to speak. "You showed kindness to a stranger?" the woman continued. "You carried my burden when you had no reason to. You faced your fears, fought your doubts, and kept your heart pure, even in darkness." The kings and queens behind her nodded in agreement. "You have proven," the woman said, "that true greatness is not found in riches or power, but in the strength of one's heart." Sandra blinked back tears. The woman smiled and stretched out her hand. In it was a small, glowing orb, no bigger than a marble. Sandra stared at it, confused. "All this? For that?" Seeing her hesitation, the woman chuckled softly. "This is no ordinary gift, Sandra." She pressed the orb into Sandra's palm. Instantly, a warm energy flowed through Sandra's body, a feeling of peace, joy, and hope, like nothing she had ever felt before. "In your world," the woman said, "this will open doors you never imagined possible." Before Sandra could ask what she meant, the palace around her began to shimmer and fade. The kings and queens waved gently, their smiles warm and proud. The woman's final words echoed in Sandra's ears. "Never forget who you are, and never stop helping others." The world turned white, and then Emma woke up. She was back on the dusty road of Ikate village. The old bundle of firewood lay neatly stacked beside her, and the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. For a moment, Sandra thought it had all been a dream, but when she looked down, she found the glowing orb still resting in her hand. Tears filled her eyes. It had been real. With new strength in her step, Sandra picked up her backpack and hurried home, the orb tucked safely in her pocket. 1 month after, Sandra sat nervously inside the small classroom that doubled as the village's only internet cafe. She had just finished her scholarship application, a scholarship she once thought was beyond her dreams. The interviewer on the video call smiled warmly. "Sandra Johnson," he said, flipping through her documents. "Your grades are impressive, but more than that, your community service and kindness have touched hearts. We're pleased to inform you you've been awarded a full scholarship to attend one of the finest universities in the country. All expenses paid." Sandra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You mean it," she stammered. The interviewer laughed. "We're not just offering you a scholarship. A foundation has also chosen to sponsor your family to lift you all out of poverty." Tears streamed down Sandra's face. At that moment, she felt the orb's warmth glow even stronger in her pocket. It had all started with a simple act of kindness helping a poor old woman carry her firewood. And now, her life and the lives of her family would never be the same again. As Sandra left the cafe that evening, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the village in golden light. She walked down the dusty road, head held high, and her dreams bigger than ever. She knew one thing for sure: kindness always finds its way back home. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.